My name is Alex Dworjan. I'm an Ansible specialist, and I'm going to be walking through Ansible Policy Enforcement and how that can be leveraged within the Ansible Automation Platform. Policy Enforcement became generally available with the Ansible Automation Platform 2.5 release on July 2nd, 2025. So what's the purpose of it? It's designed to allow you to enforce policies within the Ansible Automation Platform. So it can assign this at various levels, organizations, inventory, job templates, and it gives me the ability to look at various things from the launch perspective. So while it doesn't look at the individual playbooks and the modules or tasks within the playbook, it does give you a lot of information that you can leverage from the actual platform perspective. Some of the common things I've seen is I can set a maintenance window so certain jobs would be unable to run during that maintenance window. I can add in extra information around extra vars, whether it's via survey or the extra var section of job template, to ensure only certain teams can provide certain information. So maybe a team can only provide a dev tag if they're in the development system, or they can do prod if they're part of a system architecture team. I can also limit certain instance groups, certain playbooks, limit inventories to certain organizations, or even prevent the relaunch of jobs. I've had this asked quite a bit in the past for teams that maybe have prompt on launch for credentials. They want to ensure that a job can't just be relaunched. You have to go through the job template and reselect the credential based on what role-based access control you have. From an architecture perspective, this is essentially how it flows. So within the automation platform, once you've set up the job template inventory or organization with that particular policy, when I click launch, it goes through that process of figuring out what the policy is, performing that evaluation with Open Policy Agent. That's the actual system that we're leveraging for this. And then that either says, yes, it passed that particular policy, or nope, it doesn't. And then that particular job fails with an error message based on what you put into your policy. So it gives you flexibility to define exactly what policy or policies that you want. And you can give a very specific error message so it's very clear as to why that particular policy failed. So I'm going to jump into a demonstration that will also show what the available options are, and that can help you decide what you may want to leverage from a policy perspective. So I'm logged into my OpenShift environment, and as you can see, I have a deployment of Open Policy Agent up and running. So from the UI perspective, I can see and run queries, but how did I actually get this stood up? I will include in the description down below an example from one of my colleagues that used Quadlet with Podman to get Open Policy Agent up and running. But from an OpenShift standpoint, I've got two examples that I'll also include in the description down below, one of which uses config maps, deployment, service, and route to have it all stood up, and a second one that is very similar, but instead of using config map for all the policies, I actually use an init container that clones my particular GitHub repository. This is probably what I would recommend, mainly because it's much easier. So if I make any changes to my repository itself, I can actually just go into OpenShift, go into the deployment itself, and I can just scale down the deployment, scale it back up. It'll reclone that repository, and I'm off and running. So a much easier way to get started, especially as you make changes, add in new policies without having to update config maps every single time. So the Ansible business unit also has a large number of examples for policies. So conveniently enough, there's a folder called AAP Policy Examples that has all kinds of various examples, which I'll include in the description. And then I also have my own repository with several examples as well. The key piece that I would focus on before you jump into the examples is this input data. So this is directly what the automation platform sends to the Open Policy Agent. So these are all the different fields, and I'll just scroll down to the example itself. So I can see an example payload that would get sent for a job template launch. I can use all of this various information to make decisions, whether it's credentials and what organization owns that particular credential, execution environment, extra vars, instance groups, inventories, so on and so forth. So this really does give you a large amount of information that I can use to make decisions based on the environment itself. So I'm going to scroll back up into my AAP policy itself. So this is the folder where I have all my various policies, and I've got quite a large number of different pieces in here. So whether it's inventories, global credentials, GitHub, so only single repos or only certain branches, this allows me to essentially define various pieces within the platform so I can ensure that the inventory being used is using an inventory source. So this would prevent static inventories from being leveraged within my environment. Some other ones that I've created myself are that relaunch that I talked about before. So I'm just using that launch type. If it's relaunched, then the job would fail. As I played around with this more, one of the questions I had was, can I combine multiple policies to a single job template inventory or organization? While you can't do that within Ansible itself, I can do that at the policy level. So I've got this team policy that I've created, which actually looks through other policies. So I'm looking for, this is the folder for the AAP team limit based on the name that I called at the top. So I've got a team limit and I've got a team vars, and it's using the extra vars restriction allowed or the team-based limit restriction allowed. Say if it is false for any one of those in terms of being allowed, that would then prevent this job from running, and it would give me an output based on what the output message was from that violation. So either a single policy being violated or multiple. So I could make this a list based on the actual policy itself. So if you notice, this is AAP team limit, team-based limit restriction. If I go into the policy, you can see the package is named AAP team limit, and the actual policy itself is team-based limit restriction. So I'm using this dot allowed as the check. And I can do that for as many policies as I want to make a combined effort within the automation platform. So now I have the Open Policy Agent server up and running. I've got policies embedded. What do I do from the automation platform side of the house? So when I log into the automation platform after I've made that upgrade, if you scroll down to the settings section, you'll see this policy portion that now exists. So this is where I set up the settings to actually connect to that Open Policy Agent server. So you just put in the host name, the port, any sort of authentication that you've set up between the two, timeouts, recounts, SSL, all those various pieces. Once that's done, the only other piece is deciding where you want the policies to be enforced. So whether it's the organization, inventory, or template level. So I've got many policies already set up at the job template level for various pieces. So once I've got, again, the policies set up to connect to my Open Policy Agent server, I can just edit any existing job template inventory or workflow and add in something as simple as don't allow a super user to run a job. So if I go into edit this template, I can see that I've got the policy enforcement set up to be AAP underscore super user underscore allowed underscore false. I'll go back into my policy here and you'll see that that matches with AAP underscore super user and then the actual policy check itself. So that's how you'd write it out within the automation platform itself to use essentially that folder and then the function that gets called. An important thing to note as I did some of this testing, make sure your functions themselves are all named differently. Within Open Policy Agent, it will combine everything into a single tree essentially. And if you've got a policy named the same in different files, it'll cause a conflict when you try to run, saying that there's more than one outcome detected for a single function, which will break many, many things. So I'm just going to launch this job template since it's already set. And before it even actually runs the job, pulls in the execution environment, I'm going to get an error that says violation job template, super user is not allowed to launch jobs because I am specifically a super user. So I'd expect that to fail as a particular user. So you can be as detailed as you want based on what your error message is. So be very clear with your violations, and that will help your end users as you go through this process. So I highly encourage you, go through the examples, go through the actual payload itself, and start coming up with policies that make sense for your teams, and start iterating through and getting used to how you may want to add in restrictions to the automation platform itself. As discussed, I will include in the description down below a blog walking through deploying the Open Policy Agent server with Quadlet. I'll include my GitHub example of doing so within OpenShift. I'll include the examples from the Ansible business unit on various policies that you can deploy. And then I'll also include my own policies, which will also include that JSON payload that I talked about before. Last but not least, I'll include the Ansible Automation Platform documentation that shows how you set up that policy section and actually put in the various policies for the job template inventory or organization. Right now, again, it is limited to just what's part of the platform itself, so it doesn't dive into playbooks or roles or modules or anything like that. But this still gives you a good opportunity to start defining what aspects of the platform itself users can have access to launch job templates from. So definitely take a look at that various payload and think about ways that you may want to add in some restriction or policy enforcement to your various existing job templates. As of right now, it is limited to just Open Policy Agent. So if you already have Open Policy Agent, I would highly recommend leveraging that. But if not, leverage one of the 2 deployment methods that I'll include in that description down below. Thank you for taking the time to learn a little bit more about policy enforcement and how you might want to leverage it within the Ansible Automation Platform. Click my picture on the right to subscribe, or click the image on the left to watch another video.